Thank you for being with us today for another of our conversations with Mexicans in New England that we are organizing in order to transmit to a broad audience the importance of culture and education and all the challenges and opportunities that Mexicans are contributing to these fields in New England. Today, our topic is binational artistic expressions, speaking to New England audiences. And we have two special guests, Pedro Alonzo and Marcos Ramírez ERRE. Thank you, Pedro and Marcos, for agreeing to be with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Pedro Alonzo is an art curator, an independent art curator based in Boston, who has worked with international collections in Ukraine, Belgium, and Mexico. He has been an adjunct curator for the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston and the Dallas Contemporary Museum, as well as with the Institute of Visual Arts of the University of Wisconsin. Alonzo has also organized exhibits at public museums and private collections in England, Boston, and San Diego. Alonzo is also a writer and contributor to art books. Marcos Ramírez ERRE is a visual artist known as ERRE and born in Tijuana, Mexico, who first studied law and worked in the construction industry as he consolidated his artistic practice, which he has been developing since the late 1980s. His work conveys strong messages about national identity, binational bonds, and race. His work has been displayed in museums in the US and Mexico, like the Museum of Contemporary Art of San Diego, the Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach, California, the Museo Carrillo Gil in Mexico City, the Centro Cultural Tijuana, the Mexican Cultural Institute in Washington, where I had the privilege of hosting one of his exhibits. And now he has an exhibit at MoCA, Mass MoCA here in Massachusetts. He has also participated in group exhibitions in both countries, as well as in Spain, Cuba, and Brazil. So let's start our conversation. Marcos, you were born at the border and lived and worked there, and your art reflects the deep understanding that you have of this reality, of the complex concept that underlies the border. If you had to describe it in a few words, what would these words be? And Pedro, you are also a man of the border where you grew up. What would your choice of words be to describe it?
So I'll answer first, since I was questioned first. For me, there's one word, is home. I inhabit the border. And the border somehow inhabits me. Since I live with one foot on one side, one foot on the other. I have the two residencies, you know, my official residency is in San Diego, California. But I have a house and I have a studio in Mexico, and I spend, I think, more time in Mexico than in San Diego, in Tijuana. So I constantly sew or put a thread, like sewing together the two sides. And I have to constantly be, I'm constantly changing from one way to another, depending on which society I'm at the moment, you know, like developing myself. But that's mainly, it's my home. And just imagine that I'm like on top of the borderline, and now in this moment, the top of that fence, like looking to one side and looking to the other. And in that sense, it's a little bit different from other people that across once has this border as a memory, as a mark in their lives, but don't have to do or be constantly moving, shifting from one society to the other. So that home and all of that implies is what it is for me, the border.
Thank you, Marcos.
Well, thank you, Alberto. Yeah, for me, I mean, I haven't lived on the border in a long time, but, you know, I was born in Tijuana and I raised in San Diego. And, you know, I can't imagine you have too many Tijuanenses on board, you know, two of us at a time. For me, the border, what I find fascinating and love about the border is the contrast. You know, it's a very, there's this fantastic contrast, and having grown up there, what I loved about it is having two, you know, very distinct places that are part of the same community, and being able to enjoy the benefits of both. That to me, so when I was a teenager and I would go to Tijuana, you know, to the bars or dancing, or you know, now I love the food, to visit friends and family. I mean, but that contrast, that ability to be able to, you know, for me to, in New England, it would be very difficult for me to be able to have that contrast here. And I really miss that. I miss the contrast and the experiences of you know, the border.
And how was your journey, personal and artistic, that brought you here to Boston, Pedro?
For me, it was very personal. I teased my wife and her sister that they made a plan to get us to move here. My sister-in-law and her family left for a year, and we house sat, and we just liked it, and we stayed. So it was very personal. But once we were here, I began to do work with the ICA Boston. I met Jill Medvedow, and she asked me to take over the Shepherd Ferry exhibition, which then led to, you know, several shows at the ICA, and now to working here. I mean, I do a lot of work in the area. So it started off as very personal, and then professionally it just continued to grow, and now it's, you know, I have to say I love living here, and we feel very well received by you know, Boston.
Okay. Marcos, how was your personal evolution from being a lawyer by training to becoming an artist? Would you say that being born in Tijuana somehow predetermined the kind of binational perspective that your art reflects?
Well, like the second part of the question, if being from Tijuana in a way modified or made me do the kind of work that I do, I think yes, it's implicit in the work, but in combination with that fact that I went to law school. So I went to law school, I graduated from law school, and so pretty much the topics and the classes that I had and the things that I learned are very important to me, but not necessarily the progression to become a practicing lawyer, because I worked for a year and I really didn't like the ambience and the corruption underlay in the system back then, and maybe still now, at least I assume this is still now. And I didn't like that for my future. And I said, I don't want to do this. But all the topics and all the elements that I find important to defend, like freedom, justice, and equality, and all of those things, I learned them there. I learned a lot in my education. And then those were things that were forever present in the reality of Tijuana and in the relationship with the United States. And so I try just to make a self-portrait of myself and my area by tasking those problems that were like very important to me with the tools that I learned in law school. And then eventually, when I decided not to continue working as a young lawyer in my uncle's office, I decided to become a construction worker. So I became an albañil, like a journeyman, you know, like a carpenter, which for my family was like a downgrading from professional. In my mom's side, I was the first professional in her family line to become a carpenter, an albañil. But I really liked the construction business, and I really liked the trade of becoming a carpenter. I'm very proud of being a carpenter. And when I decided that I wanted to be an artist, I just try to make the symbiotic connection between my past as a university student an incipient lawyer without knowledge about materials and construction notes and whatever. And then the result is this weird work that I started doing that I'm now very proud of it. Maybe my best works were the ones in which I was very fresh, and I started doing those works without the mentality of an artist and only with the mentality of the humanist and the builder. So yeah, that's the way I arrived to who I am. It's more complicated now to make work than back then.
But I while you were explaining this, I was imagining your Trojan horse at the border in Insight in the 90s. So it had this conceptual part, but it also had all the carpentry involved. Isn't that right?
Yes, yes. And the people in the city used to say that why I didn't finish the horse, why I didn't plaster it. Because people at the border are used to, and the Mexican side as well, are used to the American way of building homes or houses via wood studs and putting together joists and wood material, and then wrapping it with paper and then mesh and then plastering on top. So people thought that the piece wasn't finished yet. Some of them didn't know that this was kind of an evocation to the original Trojan horse that you find in the Iliad of Homer's, you know. But yes, I use the skills that I learned in working in construction with the metaphors and the ideas that I learn or remember from my upbringing in my house. Because in my house, actually, there was a couple things that we never lacked, we never missed. We always had a home, and those were food and books. So I remember my father buying the encyclopedias and books, so we could be really in contact with the history of the world and cultures and stuff like that. So the first inspiration, the Trojan horse from Homer, I saw it first when I was 10 years old in a book, in an encyclopedia that my father bought. So all those memories, once I was able to make it with my own hands, and then give it shift the meaning and give it another idea, another perspective to the reality of the site specificity that we were living, in the time we were living, I just went ahead and did it.
And was that like a very specific moment in your career? That piece in particular?
Yes, well, back three years before, I had this great opportunity to be part of this amazing festival that was Insight. And the second edition of Insight was Insight 94, first 92, and the biggest one in 1994. And then I made another piece that was like a replica of a house in Tijuana from the outskirts of the city that was really well received. And that gave me the opportunity to make another project in the next edition, 1997. So it's kind of a premonitory work, you know, most of the works in that edition, the intention was not really, but I went ahead and I did something that was about the relationship between the two countries. And if it was not, I made it important, I guess. I made it important to talk about those things. In the next edition in 2000, they directly went on to work with those kind of thematics. And so it was important in the region for me, and I just kind of projected into the festival. And for me, it was important because by then I had already 13 years of my life crossing almost every day to go to work, and making an hour 20, sitting in line in my car to get to work for 8 hours, 10 hours, and then come back and sleep in Tijuana. And so I promised to myself, if I have the chance, at what point in life, I will make all these 50,000 people that are in their cars, I will make them think about art and about the situation between these two countries. And it's what I did. I just put the work over there instead of pushing them all to go to visit a museum, put the work right there. Yeah.
Great. Pedro, do you remember Insight?
Yeah, no, I remember Insight very well, and I have to credit Insight with you know, San Diego. The first exhibit of contemporary art I ever saw was at the museum in La Jolla, which was then called the La Jolla Museum of Contemporary Art. It's now the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego. The first show I saw there was Anish Kapoor, and this was over 30 years ago. And then Insight later, you know, sort of broke with the idea of having to show work in a museum, and you know, this idea of site specificity and working with artists in different environments outside of the museum became, you know, very important to me, especially in the work I do now. So I do think back to Insight and what I saw and learned there. And it's also when I met Marcos. I mean, we met. I mean, yeah, we met through Insight, I guess. I mean, that's when we met.
96, just short, like 96 in Iturralde Gallery, 187 Person Hands. We went to see that show and we met there.
Is that where we met?
Yeah.
Gosh, okay. That's where we met then. You have a better memory than I do.
Yeah. You and Victor were there basically.
Yeah, I remember being there, and I didn't realize that was the first time we met.
Wow.
Yeah, but you know, we were in the region. A lot.
We lost you.
¿Eh?
Te perdimos poquito. We lost you.
No,
The image.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was me, my internet, but it seems that it's Pedro's, no?
Well, let's go.
Let's continue with you, Marcos, while Pedro comes back. Despite the pandemic, an exhibition of yours has remained in display, as I mentioned here, in MASMOCA, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. Hola, Pedro.
Hola, Pedro.
Bienvenido. Bueno, siga. Let's continue, Marcos. Tell us about, well, the exhibit includes an installation of a border wall and a version of some of your very important pieces. Can you tell us more about the exhibit and also about the messages that these installations in particular convey? Why showing at MASMOCA? How did this project happen?
Well, yes. Well, I'm showing in MASMOCA because they invited me to show there. That's one, you know. But like many things in life, sometimes you have to provoke those invitations. So one visit that I did to New York, and then I went and visited from New York, very good friends of mine, a couple that lives in Boston, and I asked him to lend me his car, and then I made a couple of phone calls, and then said to the people in MASMOCA that I wanted to visit there, and then I wanted to deliver a book to one of the curators. And when I arrived there, after 3 hours of driving, I was introduced to two of the curators, and one of them, Susan Cross, she seemed to like my work and she knew about my work. And she said to me that she wanted to invite me to a show, a group show, a couple of years before, and then that was not possible, so they didn't do it. And she liked my work, so I gave her a book that we produced for an exhibition that I did in the Carrillo Hill Museum in Mexico. And eventually I received an invitation for the possibility of making an exhibition. So the exhibition and the works in the exhibition are a result of working with Susan Cross, the curator, who wanted to present something that would represent my work. In the year 2018, I presented a piece in the Oceanside Museum of Art. There was a replica of the fence that divides Mexico and the United States in the facade of the museum, on top of a glass entrance door in that building. in which I had a quotation from Langston Hughes in the bottom, a Renaissance poet from New York. And so the curator, that ignited again the interest from the curator to invite me and to do and bring that work to the museum. They invited me there. I went there and we selected, they had a selection of the space that I was going to occupy. And this was this kind of a box-shaped gallery that I was going to be in. And I started pushing a little bit more. And that I like to have also the opportunity to show on the outside walls of the gallery. And then eventually I pushed a little bit more, that I wanted to put a couple more pieces in the walkway in between galleries and stuff like that. That's how I kind of duplicated the exhibition space. You know, like looking at the museum, seeing the museum and before in magazines and videos or whatever, I wanted, like many other artists, I guess, the huge, big gallery, central gallery. And since I'm capable of doing work in large scale, I had some ideas. But once I was proposed by them to join in that gallery, I knew there was a gallery or not doing anything or waiting for couple years, 4 years until I was lucky enough to get the gallery. So I adapted and I still push a little bit. And so what we presented is work that has to be or has to do with my career. The curator selected all pieces and we did a couple of new pieces, mainly about my relationship with our own history in Mexico, and then with the idea of us and it's very close for you guys to go. It's just like the museum is open, so instead of me telling you with words what it is, you should just climb in your car. I will not recommend the bus right now, but climb in your car. It's a very nice drive and go, and it's a huge space. And so social distance will be guaranteed, and I hope you can have a nice experience, you know, like looking at this work and touching the topics that are important. You know, now it seems that they're not that important, and that's a conflict that I'm dealing with, because these are very important topics in the normal world, you know, about border and migration, the big fence that divides cultures, stuff like that. But now we are confronting something that is more urgent, which is the persistence of human life, you know, and then the persistence or the safeguarding or democracy and the equality between the groupings of people that are living in the United States. So we have these other topics that are super present right now, but it's still, as the world is going to come back to the same everyday problems that we have in the near future, that is something that you have to go and see. Plus the many shows.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to go back a couple weeks ago, Marcos, and I loved it again. And I think it still gives a very strong message. And I was interested in seeing how the people would react to the exhibit. So and interesting enough also is that it's going to be there for several years. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think it's going to be up to October of 2021. It was going to be for 2 years, but this year, it was closed for most of it, you know. But it's still, they're open, and they have another year, and you have another year to go and visit and see these magnificent exhibitions that that they have over there. There's plenty of amazing work, and the space is also really, really spectacular.
Fantastic. Yeah. Pedro, I'm glad you are back with us again.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we've been living with the pandemic for almost more than 7 months, and many of the activities that we all do have reshaped in some way. And we've been learning to do many things remotely. It is possible that not everything will go back to be done exactly as it was done before the pandemic hit. What is your opinion about the long-term effects of the pandemic on art? Will exhibits or our relationship to art change after this?
Well, there was a report today on the radio about, you know, how museums might stop or at least lessen their dependence on, you know, on big exhibitions that need lots of borrowed work, and focus more on showing their permanent collections and reframing their permanent collections, instead of borrowing work from all over the world. You know, those shows are now beginning to be seen as expensive and impractical. I hope that doesn't end. I mean, I think those shows are important, and I would love to continue to see them. But I also feel that it does give us the opportunity to, you know, to think more, you know, locally, and also to present more work outside. I think this would be a great opportunity for museums to think what, you know, to stop, you know, museums have traditionally thought about, and galleries, about how do we bring people into our space. And as Marcos was saying earlier today, you know, after crossing that border, you know, 1,000 times and waiting in that line for, you know, a lifetime, which I have too, the border from, you know, the line from Tijuana to San Diego, you know, bringing art to the people and to putting it right there in front of them. And I think that that's very important. And I think that our relationship, you know, I think that I'd like to see that become part of the mix or the toolbox that museums are using. I'd like to see that become more active. I think the luxury of people going to museums, you know, it's becoming a luxury. I think it's becoming more complicated for people to go to museums. And I'm not saying, and I want the museums to stay open and thrive, but I do think it would be an interesting opportunity for museums to reach out to the public in different ways and put works out in public space more regularly, and to be a more thriving part of their program. I think that's a change that would benefit, you know, the public and the museums and the artists, well, everyone, really.
Thank you, Pedro. And what do you think of this, Marcos? And how has the pandemic changed your work, and your what kind of projects are you working on now? We were hoping to have you here in Boston as a fellow this autumn, and unfortunately it won't be now, but we hope that you'll be coming next year.
Yeah, well, the pandemic it's been gentle with me. You know, like I lost some opportunities, and the work is slow. I'm a privileged person. I have a house. I have means to survive. I have a studio in which I can do stuff. But I've basically been trying to think, and since I had this opportunity, it was possible for me to access that fellowship because I was a finalist, 21 finalists to select 10 fellows. That election never happened, and they decided to suspend the year. But we have also the opportunity to go back, because if I apply again, I'm automatically a finalist, which means that now we're going to be like 25, or like, no, more like 50 for 10 places. But still, they respect the fact that we did the application and everything. I hope I can go and join you guys. But I already had in mind that I was going to have some kind of sabbatical, you know, and so, well, I took it with optimism when everything seemed like unavoidable, that we have to stay home or whatever. I started taking care of my health. I started taking care of my studio, my house, and try to do the stuff that would be productive in terms of capital too, like preserving, fixing my cars, working on my yard, things that are not that complicated, and then reading and stuff like that, you know, like simplifying the thing. And this is the fellowship is not the only thing that fell down. I had a couple of residencies in different places that I had to decline or postpone because, like, if you're going to be and during the pandemic, I'd rather do it in my own house than in a studio with empty walls and no furniture in the middle of, you know, LA, whatever, even though it's beautiful. If you cannot visit galleries, you cannot go see other artists, it makes it complicated. So all those things you have to adapt. We have to adapt to whatever, however pitch the pitcher throws, you have to try to find a way to bat at it and hit a home run or a hit or whatever, and get on base. So I can lie to you and pretend that I have thousand projects coming, you know. But my purpose now is to try to understand this new reality and to not make work that reacts, even though most of my work does that. I don't want to do something that reacts immediately in a very visceral way. I want to produce an intelligent group of works, but taking the time of analyzing whatever we're experimenting or experiencing right now. And I have to wait after November 3rd to see what are the expectations for this new reality. And then I might start like putting my hands on the work. So it's been hard, but not so hard for me. I really feel sorry for all these people that lost their loved ones and suffer in their own health or whatever. I personally lost a couple of people that I love, and some others that I cherish a lot, and they keep falling here in Mexico. You know, and it's not well managed, not by the U.S. government, not by the Mexican government, and so there's things that are like urgent, and the preservation of life is maybe a little bit more urgent now than making a couple of works of art. You know, like I'll be here, I hope, and I'll be doing something in response of this reality as soon as I can, and I feel.
Thank you, Marcos, for such thoughtful insights. Pedro, tell us, would you say there's a difference between curating art in different parts of the world and for different publics? And tell us about, do you think art is truly universal language? And how is your project with Pedro Reyes for the anniversary of the atomic bomb going? It has been postponed. What are you thinking on that?
Yeah, I think, well, so curating within the art world is very similar, right? Similar audiences, similar values, you know, but not always. When I curated an exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Oaxaca, and it was quite, you know, there it was very much, God, how can I even explain it? Because it felt quite distant from the rest of the art world, actually. But in a very good way, you know, a very strong group of local artists. They had their ideas and what was important to them locally, which didn't seem to correspond with a lot of the rest of the art world. And actually, I really liked that. I really liked working there. But it also, working in Oaxaca, forced me to think about, you know, in every community there are advantages and disadvantages. In the U.S., in a big museum, everything has to be planned out with tremendous amounts of time. It's very expensive to work here, and it also changes can be problematic, right? There's an aversion to last-minute changes or big changes. But in Oaxaca, you can make a last-minute change, no problem. It doesn't cost a lot. So it allowed me to think differently about working with artists and presenting work, and it was great to really embrace that. So yeah, you know, it really depends where you go, but I do think that the language of art is universal. And with Pedro Reyes, so we were supposed to, Pedro, in February of this year, we presented an inflatable mushroom cloud in La Plaza de las Tres Culturas in Tlatelolco in Mexico City, for the anniversary of Mexico leading the effort to create the world's first nuclear-free zone. The cloud was then supposed to travel to New York City for the 50th anniversary of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the nuclear treaty that keeps us all safe. You know, that's how the nuclear experts like to talk about it. However, every 5 years they get together, the delegates, to discuss the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But the last 5 and 10 years, there haven't been any real conclusions. It's been seen as problematic. So we thought, working with the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, who invented the doomsday clock, they were very good at helping us to develop strategies to get the most impact out of the presence of the cloud. So the goal was to present it in New York in May during the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we weren't able to. But now we're looking towards next year in January, when the Non-Proliferation Treaty takes place. So we will be there. I mean, that's our plan, and that's what I'm working on now. Actually, before this call, that's exactly what I was looking at. I was going over budgets and what we can and what we can't do now in this new reality. Because, you know, in the end, we need to be conscious of this new reality, and we need to be safe. So large gatherings, a symposium indoors, things like that, they just won't work, right? It's not safe. So we have to pivot. And but you know, we're working on it. So I'm very excited to present the project.
Great. And I'm sorry for saying that it was another anniversary and not what the anniversary is.
Yeah.
So we have 2 questions from the public.
Oh, great.
Inés Maldonado asks to both of you, I suppose, did you grow up with any binational artistic figure that you admired? Do you think that having references, someone to look up to, is important? And the other is, would you be interested after the pandemic to create work of art online and curate exhibits online?
That's for you, Pedro.
The first, well, the second question, yes, so I was asked to curate something online before the pandemic started, and actually it was in Miami in December. Someone asked me, would you like to curate something online? And I was like, you know, not so interested. But in late March, early April, it turned out to be a great idea. So now I'm definitely thinking about it and seeing what's being done and how it works. I think curate online, you know, well, it definitely presents many options, right? And an endless audience in some regards. And it would be hypocritical of me to say that we want to bring art to the people, but only do it physically, when online is a very effective way of bringing art to the people. So my viewpoint on that has definitely changed, and I like the idea a lot. And actually, earlier this year, the Brazilian artist Adriana Verajao asked me if I would put together a selection of work for her Instagram post. And it took me a long time to do it. I was a little hesitant, but then when I did it, I loved it. It was a lot of fun. And as for binational figures, that's a really good question. But you know, sadly, I don't really, there really weren't binational figures. For me, there were people in Mexico, where I started my career in the arts, artists, art dealers primarily, and then in the United States, is really where I met curators who played a big role. Well, actually, now that I'm saying that, there is a binational figure, Victor Zamudio, who like us was also born in Mexico, raised in he was born in Hermosillo. He wasn't as lucky as Marcos and I to be born in Tijuana. He was born in Hermosillo, but he was raised in San Diego. And Victor played a very important role in my career. I would not be a curator without his support and guidance. And he also, you know, I didn't study art history, I studied communication. So it was very important to have someone to help me understand, you know, how to write about art, to give me guidance and so yes, so Victor would be the binational figure who I can't believe I forgot about until I said I didn't have one.
That's good. What about you, Marcos?
Well, me in terms of figures, more than figures, and it was about events. I mean, when I started doing artwork, we had this exhibition that was organized between San Diego and Tijuana. They did an exhibition that ended up going to Yokohama, Japan. And then through that exhibition, I met some of the remaining alive Chicano muralists from San Diego that went there. And then I was not invited as an artist. We had this opportunity, this big break they gave us of paying $500 and you will have like a round trip to Tokyo, Japan in 1 week in a hotel. So a couple of my friends were invited as part of the exhibition. And we were, at the other two, we were incipient artists. So we went along, and that was very definitive for me to decide that I wanted to become an artist, because I saw amazing works that were brought from Tijuana and San Diego as a joint community to the sister city of Yokohama. But I also saw some works that were not as amazing. And I said, well, like if I work hard and I develop some skills and I really work strong, I might be invited again if they make this exhibition in 5 years or whatever. And then there's when I got to know these people like Victor Ochoa and some other artists and muralists. But like as the same thing with Pedro, I had my references in Mexico, and then my references of artists in the United States. And then I also had this knowledge about the Mexican muralists coming to the United States and making murals and intervening in spaces in the United States. And then how they were somehow important in the careers of other artists like Siqueiros and Pollock, and eventually became an exhibition and like showing the influence from one to the other. But me, I arrived a little bit late, you know, like even in the Tijuana area, there were a very important group of people that were doing work in the area that was called the Border Art Workshop, the art previous to my arrival to the art world in the area. They were important, and somehow maybe those were the binational figures for me, you know, like Guillermo Gomez Peña and Luis Hawk, but more in the local way. And about the video, the internet, doing work in the internet, like, well, you cannot avoid it now. Like I was going to make some workshops in places called 18th Street Arts in Santa Monica, where I was going to do that residency I referred before. And it was not possible. So I ended up making those workshops and adapting them to make them in this format of Zoom, and then working with kids in a remote way, and also teaching a class in UCLA with a friend in a remote way. So you have to adapt. For me, it's very important, the human contact. I'm eager to go back and see people, and when it's possible, and I'm very respectful, well, touch them, embrace them, kiss them, you know, like it's part of my nature. But you have to do whatever is important. You're not going to take off your helmet outside of our atmosphere. You know, like you go to the outer space, you need to follow the rules. Wear your suit, keep your oxygen source and your helmet, and somehow this is what it is. You know, like but I'm hoping that eventually I'm going to be able to go and embrace you, Alberto, and embrace Pedro, and have the tequila in real time, and talk about the important things in life that you can only say when you look at another person at their own eyes, you know, eye to eye, and in the presence, and with the sound of your voice right there resonating in the room. But well, for now, this is the best we can do, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think it's wonderful to close this conversation precisely with the messages of both of you, that of hope in the future and also of resilience to this moment. I don't know if you have any last thought you want to share?
Well, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Pedro. First, beauty, then H.
No, I was going to say, I hope Marcos, we can get you out here. I would love to have you out here hugging and kissing everyone once it's safe, of course. And, you know, I love the idea of a tequila with you would be, you know, I miss that. I miss hanging out with you. We spent a lot of time together, and, you know, I'll never forget that dinner at my house where the police came and made everyone go home. So I hope we can do that here.
I was in Coronado in the U.S.
Yeah.
We have parties. My neighbor has parties with banda. I don't know where he gets the money. I'm kind of suspicious where he gets it. But every week he's got a live banda, and Sundays from like 12 noon up to like 3 in the morning. And then there's nobody says nothing. Everybody's afraid, or nobody wants to like deal with that issue. But I will go there because I have to go. And also you are going to be invited, if you're not already invited, to participate in that book that Harvard is inviting me to make about the work. So I want to end up going there to work with Falconi and Jose Falconi. So one way or the other, we'll see each other. I have family there, or friends that are like family, and you are also part of my family. So we'll be there in contact sooner or later.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Very good. Well,
gracias, Alberto.
Thank you very much, both of you, for this lovely conversation.
Thank you, Alberto. It was great.
Thank you for all our viewers today.
God bless everyone.